The large American flag was carefully draped over the polished wooden casket. I stood at a distance, watching through iron cemetery gates as strangers gathered around my father. They wouldn't let me in. "Family only," my stepmother had said, her voice cold as the November air. Then the honor guard stepped forward, and I heard the words that changed everything. "We present this flag on behalf of a grateful nation and the United States Army to Colonel Victor Martinez." The guard's white gloves moved with practiced precision. As they folded the flag into a perfect triangle, my half-brother stepped forward to receive it, but the lead officer hesitated, scanning the crowd. His eyes found mine beyond the gates. "Where is Elena Martinez?" he asked. The colonel's orders were specific. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I never imagined I'd have to fight to say goodbye to my own father. Growing up, Dad had been my hero, strict but fair, a military man to his core. When I was 12, he married Diane after my mother died. She brought her son, Marcus, into our home, and slowly, my place in the family began to shrink. The last time I saw Dad was 3 months before his death. He'd looked thin, pale against the hospital pillows, but his eyes lit up when I entered the room. "There's my girl," he said, reaching for my hand. Diane sat on the other side, her face tightening as I approached. Marcus stood by the window, scrolling through his phone. I placed the bag of Dad's favorite lemon candies on the bedside table and sat down, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires connecting him to machines. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" I asked, trying to sound upbeat despite the heaviness in my chest. The doctors had given him 6 months at best. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer doesn't offer much hope. "Better now that you're here," he said, squeezing my hand. "Did you get time off from the hospital okay?" I nodded. Being a resident in emergency medicine meant my schedule was brutal, but I'd traded shifts for 3 days straight to make this visit happen. "Elena," Dad said, his voice suddenly serious. "We need to talk about some things. Important things." Before he could continue, Diane stood up. "Victor, you need to rest. The doctor said not to get worked up." She glanced at her watch. "Besides, it's almost time for your medication." Dad frowned slightly. "I'm fine, Diane. I need to speak with Elena about." "Later," she interrupted. "You can talk later. Marcus and I need to discuss the insurance paperwork with you while you're lucid." She looked at me pointedly. "Perhaps Elena could come back tomorrow." I started to protest, but Dad's gentle squeeze stopped me. "It's okay, sweetheart. Come back in the morning. We'll talk then." His eyes held mine, communicating something I couldn't quite grasp. "Promise me you'll come back." "Of course, Dad. First thing tomorrow," I promised. When I returned the next day, Diane met me in the hallway outside his room. "He had a rough night," she said, arms crossed. "The doctor has restricted visitors to immediate family only." "I am immediate family," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm his daughter." She smiled thinly. "Legal family, Elena. Marcus and I need to discuss end-of-life arrangements, and the doctor agrees it's best not to have additional stress factors." She placed a hand on my arm. "I'll tell him you stopped by." I tried calling later that day, but no one answered. The next morning, I went directly to the nurse's station and asked to see my father. "I'm sorry," the nurse said, checking her computer. "It says here only his wife and son are approved visitors." She looked uncomfortable. "Hospital policy. We have to respect the patient's wishes." "This isn't his wish," I said, my voice rising. "It's my stepmother. Please, just ask him if he wants to see me." She promised to check, but when she returned, her expression told me everything. "I'm sorry. Mrs. Martinez says he's not up for visitors outside the approved list." I tried every day for a week. Called, showed up, pleaded with different nurses. Nothing worked. Finally, I wrote him a letter, pouring my heart onto 3 pages, telling him how much I loved him, how proud I was to be his daughter. I gave it to a sympathetic orderly who promised to deliver it directly to Dad. 2 days later, my phone rang at 3 a.m. I fumbled for it in the dark, heart racing when I saw the hospital's number. "Elena Martinez?" a gentle voice asked. "Yes, that's me. This is night nurse Sandra from Memorial. Your father asked me to call you." She paused. "He received your letter, but he's declined significantly in the last few hours. If you want to see him, you should come now." I drove through empty streets, praying I wouldn't be too late. When I arrived, Sandra met me at the elevator. "He's been asking for you," she said, leading me quickly down the corridor. "His wife and son left about an hour ago to get some rest." Dad looked so small in the hospital bed, his once powerful frame diminished. His eyes were closed, his breathing labored. I sat beside him, taking his hand gently in mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad, I whispered. I'm here. His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. When they found my face, he smiled faintly. Elena, he breathed. My girl. I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner, I said, fighting back tears. He shook his head slightly. Not your fault. His voice was barely audible. Listen carefully. There's a box, in my study. Behind the books, military history. The key, in my dog tags. Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. Dad, don't strain yourself, I said. Important, he insisted. Promise me, you'll find it. I promise, I said, squeezing his hand. He seemed to relax then. We sat in silence, just being together. After a while, he spoke again, his voice clearer for a moment. You were always so much like me. Too stubborn for your own good. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. I'm proud of you, Elena. Always have been. Those were the last words my father ever said to me. He slipped into unconsciousness shortly after, and I sat holding his hand until dawn broke. When the door opened, Diane stood there, Marcus behind her. Her expression shifted from shock to fury. What are you doing here? She demanded. Who let you in? Before I could answer, the monitor beside Dad's bed emitted a steady, unbroken tone. What followed was chaos, nurses rushing in, the code being called, me being pushed aside as they tried to revive him. But I knew he was gone. I'd felt the moment his spirit left, like a tangible presence passing through the room. When the doctor called time of death, Diane collapsed into Marcus's arms, sobbing. I stood apart, silent tears streaming down my face. The doctor approached me, recognizing me from my hospital ID badge clipped to my jacket. Dr. Martinez, I'm so sorry for your loss, he said quietly. Diane's head snapped up. She shouldn't be here, she said through tears. She's not supposed to be here. The doctor looked uncomfortable, but before anything else could be said, a hospital administrator appeared. Mrs. Martinez, she said gently, there are arrangements to be made. Perhaps we could speak privately? I watched as they led Diane and Marcus away. I approached Dad's bed one last time, leaned down and kissed his forehead. Goodbye, Dad. I whispered. I'll find the box. I promise. I didn't hear from Diane or Marcus after that. The funeral arrangements were made without my input or knowledge. I only learned about the service when a former army buddy of Dad's called to offer condolences. I'm so sorry I can't make it to Arlington for the ceremony, he said. Your father was a great man, a true hero. Arlington? I repeated, confused. When? There was an awkward pause. Thursday, he finally said. I assumed you knew. Full military honors, as befitting his rank. He's being buried in Arlington National Cemetery. I thanked him and hung up, hands shaking. Dad had always spoken of Arlington, the honor it represented. Of course that's where he would be laid to rest. But no one had told me. I called the cemetery directly and confirmed the details. Then I called Diane. The call went straight to voicemail, as I expected. I left a message, keeping my voice steady. Diane, it's Elena. I've learned about Dad's funeral at Arlington. I'll be there to pay my respects to my father. Please call me back so we can coordinate. She never called back. Neither did Marcus. I booked a flight to Washington, D.C. anyway, packed my black dress, and prepared to say goodbye to my father. The day of the funeral dawned clear and cold. Arlington National Cemetery stretched before me, row upon row of white headstones standing in perfect formation, like the soldiers they commemorated. I arrived early, hoping to speak with Diane before the service began. Instead, I was met by a funeral director who looked deeply uncomfortable. Ms. Martinez, he asked, checking a clipboard. I'm sorry, but I've been instructed that only those on this list are permitted to attend the service. He showed me the paper with about 20 names. Mine wasn't among them. There must be a mistake, I said. I'm Colonel Martinez's daughter. He shook his head. I'm sorry. Mrs. Martinez was very specific. I stood there, stunned. You're telling me I can't attend my own father's funeral? I'm truly sorry, he repeated. Perhaps you could pay your respects after the service? I saw Diane's car pull up then, Marcus helping her out. She wore elegant black, a veil covering her face. Several other cars arrived, Dad's colleagues, friends from his military days. They gathered in a somber group, no one noticing me standing off to the side. The funeral director approached Diane, leaned in to say something. She turned in my direction, then quickly looked away, shaking her head firmly. The message was clear, I wasn't welcome. I watched from a distance as they moved toward the gravesite, a military honor guard escorting my father's flag-draped casket. My legs felt rooted to the ground, tears blurring my vision. I couldn't believe this was happening. How could they keep me from saying goodbye to my own father? As the procession passed through the cemetery gates, I noticed two uniformed officers standing slightly apart from the group. One held a polished wooden box under his arm. Something about their stance, the way they surveyed the gathering, caught my attention. The taller of the two spotted me and nudged his companion. They exchanged words, then began walking in my direction. "Ms. Elena Martinez?" the taller officer asked as they approached. I nodded, wiping away tears. "I'm Major Reynolds, and this is Captain Herrera. We served with your father in Iraq." He glanced toward the procession disappearing down the path. "May I ask why you're not with the family?" "I'm not permitted," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "My stepmother's orders." The officers exchanged glances. "That's irregular," Captain Herrera said carefully. "Especially given the colonel's explicit instructions." "What instructions?" I asked. Major Reynolds seemed to make a decision. "We're here on official business, following your father's last orders. Perhaps you should accompany us to the service." "I told you, I'm not allowed." "With all due respect, Ms. Martinez," he interrupted, "we answer to the United States Army, not to Mrs. Martinez. Your father was very clear about the protocols for today." Something like hope flickered in my chest. "What did he say?" "That will become evident shortly," Captain Herrera replied. "Please, come with us." I hesitated, then nodded. They flanked me as we walked toward the gravesite, my heart pounding with each step. As we approached, I could see Diane and Marcus in the front row of chairs. Diane noticed us first, her body stiffening under her black coat. She leaned toward the funeral director, whispering urgently. He started to move in our direction, but Major Reynolds stepped forward, intercepting him. They spoke quietly, the funeral director's expression changing from obstinate to surprised, then resigned. He nodded and stepped back. Diane was watching. Now, her face a mask of controlled fury beneath her veil. Marcus looked confused, glancing between his mother and me. The other mourners shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. The chaplain began the service, his words about duty, honor, and sacrifice floating over the assembled group. I stood at the back, the two officers beside me like sentinels. I barely heard the eulogies that followed, colleagues praising Dad's military achievements, his leadership, his integrity. My eyes were fixed on the casket, draped in the American flag that represented everything he had stood for. Then came the moment that changed everything. The honor guard stepped forward to perform the flag-folding ceremony. The chaplain spoke. The traditional words, "We present this flag on behalf of a grateful nation and the United States Army to Colonel Victor Martinez." As the guards began the precise, triangular folds, Major Reynolds stepped forward. In accordance with Colonel Martinez's explicit written instructions, he announced in a clear, carrying voice, "This ceremony will proceed according to his wishes." The honor guard continued folding the flag with practiced precision, 13 triangular folds representing the 13 original colonies. Each movement was executed with perfect synchronization, a dance of honor performed countless times but never routine. I stood transfixed, my father's casket before me, the officers beside me like anchors in a storm. When the flag was folded into its final triangle, the lead guard held it reverently, but instead of turning toward Diane or Marcus, he looked at Major Reynolds, who stepped forward again. "Colonel Martinez left explicit instructions regarding this ceremony," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent cemetery. "I will now read from his official directive." He unfolded a document bearing the Army seal. "I, Colonel Victor Martinez, being of sound mind, hereby direct that upon my death, the ceremonial flag shall be presented to my daughter, Elena Martinez, as my primary next of kin and the heir to my military legacy." A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. Diane stood abruptly, her voice sharp beneath her veil. "This is ridiculous. I'm his wife. This must be a mistake." Major Reynolds remained unmoved. "Ma'am, these orders were filed with the Army 3 months ago, properly witnessed and notarized. There is no mistake." The honor guard turned toward me, the folded flag extended in white-gloved hands. Time seemed to slow as I stepped forward, aware of every eye upon me. The weight of the flag as it was placed in my hands surprised me. So compact yet so heavy with meaning. The guard stepped back and offered a solemn salute. "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your father's honorable and faithful service." Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the flag to my chest. In that moment, I felt my father's presence so strongly it was as if he stood beside me. Through this final act, he had acknowledged me, claimed me, honored me before everyone who had tried to erase me from his life. Diane's voice cut through my thoughts. "This is outrageous." She turned to the funeral director. "Stop this immediately." The chaplain looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Martinez, perhaps we should continue with the service. No, she snapped. This is my husband's funeral, and I will not have it desecrated by. She pointed at me, unable to even say my name. Captain Herrera stepped forward. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a military funeral conducted according to Colonel Martinez's orders. If you continue to disrupt the proceedings, we will be forced to ask you to leave. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of birds. Diane stared at the officers in disbelief, then at me. Without another word, she sank back into her chair, her body rigid with fury. The service continued. The rifle volleys cracked across the cemetery, 3 shots from 7 rifles creating the 21-gun salute. A bugler played taps, the mournful notes drifting through the crisp air. Throughout it all, I stood holding my father's flag, tears streaming down my face, mourning not just his death but all the years we'd lost. When the service concluded, people began to disperse. Some approached Diane and Marcus with condolences. Others, mostly military personnel, came to me. Men and women in uniform, some with tears in their eyes, sharing stories about my father, his leadership, his courage, his integrity. Each handshake, each embrace, felt like another piece of him being returned to me. Your father spoke of you often, a gray-haired general told me, his handshake firm. He was immensely proud of your work in emergency medicine. Following the family tradition of service, he used to say. Another officer, a woman with captain's bars, squeezed my hand. He kept your photo on his desk. Called you his shining star. These revelations pierced my heart. All the time I thought he had forgotten me, he had been carrying me with him, speaking of me, proud of me. As the crowd thinned, Major Reynolds approached again, the wooden box I'd noticed earlier in his hands. There's something else, Ms. Martinez. Your father entrusted this to us with instructions to deliver it to you personally after the ceremony. The polished mahogany box bore the Army Medical Corps insignia, the same symbol on the lapel pin my father had given me when I was accepted to medical school. He wanted to ensure this reached you, regardless of circumstances, Reynolds said, with a pointed glance toward Diane, who was watching us from a distance. What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know the contents, he replied. The colonel was very private about it. He only said it was your rightful inheritance. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, wondering what secrets it contained. Thank you for this. For everything. He nodded, then hesitated. Your father was a great man, Dr. Martinez. We served together in some of the worst places on earth. He saved countless lives, including mine. He straightened, offering a final salute. It was an honor to fulfill his last orders. As they departed, I stood alone by my father's casket, one hand on the polished wood, the other clutching the flag and box. I'm here, Dad, I whispered. I made it. A shadow fell across me. I looked up to see Marcus standing awkwardly a few feet away. Without his mother beside him, he seemed smaller somehow, less certain. Elena, he said, his voice strained. I didn't know about any of this. About the flag, or Mom keeping you away from the hospital. I studied his face, searching for the truth. Marcus and I had never been close, 12 years apart in age, thrust together by our parents' marriage, we'd been strangers sharing a home. He'd been away at college most of the time I still lived at home, and afterward, our paths rarely crossed. Except at holiday dinners that grew increasingly tense as Diane's influence over Dad strengthened. Would it have made a difference if you had known? I asked quietly. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know. Maybe. He sighed. Heavily. He asked for you, you know. At the end. Mom told him you were too busy with your residency to come. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I tried every day to see him. They wouldn't let me in. I'm starting to realize that. He glanced back toward Diane, who was watching us intently from beside a black town car. I should go. She's not in a good place right now. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Marcus. He paused. Did he suffer? At the end? A flicker of compassion crossed his face. No. He went peacefully. The doctors made sure of that. I nodded, grateful for this small mercy. Thank you for telling me. I watched as he rejoined Diane, who immediately began speaking rapidly, gesturing in my direction. Whatever reconciliation might have been possible seemed to evaporate as he listened to her, his posture stiffening. They got into the car without looking back. Standing alone at my father's grave, I felt strangely peaceful. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the white headstones. I placed my hand on the casket one last time. Goodbye, Dad, I whispered. I love you. With the flag and box carefully tucked under my arm, I walked slowly through the rows of markers, each representing a life of service, each surrounded by stories of love and loss. By the time I reached the cemetery gates, dusk was falling. A taxi waited to take me back to my hotel. In my room, I placed the flag carefully on the bed and sat down with the box on my lap. It was locked, a small brass keyhole in the front. I remembered Dad's words in the hospital, the key, in my dog tags. I hadn't seen Dad's dog tags in years. Where would they be now? With Diane? In his personal effects at the house? As I turned the box over, examining it for clues, I noticed a small envelope taped to the bottom. My name was written across it in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a key and a note: Elena, if you're reading this, then Reynolds and Herrera did their job. This box contains what's rightfully yours. I'm sorry for the years we lost. I hope someday you'll understand and perhaps forgive me. All my love, Dad. My hands trembled as I inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft click. Inside, nestled in dark blue velvet, lay Dad's dog tags, their metal surfaces dulled with age. Beside them was a sealed envelope and a smaller velvet box. I lifted out the dog tags first, running my fingers over the embossed information: his name, blood type, service number, religion. These had hung around his neck through 2 wars, part of his identity as a soldier and a healer. The small velvet box contained a medal, the Silver Star, one of the highest honors for valor in combat. I knew Dad had received it for saving an entire squad under enemy fire in Afghanistan, but I'd never seen it. He'd never been one to display his decorations or speak of his accomplishments. Finally, I opened the sealed envelope. Inside were legal documents: Dad's will, executed 3 months before his death, and a letter from his attorney. The will was straightforward. While Diane received the house and certain financial assets as his surviving spouse, he had established a separate trust for me, containing his military pension, life insurance, and several investments. The attorney's letter explained that Dad had revised his will after his diagnosis, ensuring I would be provided for despite any interference. There was another document, a deed to a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a property I hadn't known existed. My sanctuary, Dad had written in the margin. Now yours. At the bottom of the box lay a journal bound in worn leather. Opening it, I recognized Dad's handwriting, pages and pages of it. The first entry was dated shortly after his marriage to Diane. The last was just weeks before his death. I began to read, and as I did, the story of the last 15 years unfolded. Before me, a story far different from what I had believed. Dad had never stopped loving me, never stopped being proud of me. But Diane had been relentless in her campaign to separate us, using manipulation, guilt, and eventually, when Dad's illness made him dependent on her care, outright deception. She intercepted my calls, discarded my letters, told him I was too busy with my own life to visit. And he, weakened by cancer and medication, had believed her, at least some of the time. But there were moments of clarity, moments when he saw through her lies. In those moments, he wrote to me in this journal, letters he never sent but poured his heart into nonetheless. My dearest Elena, one entry began: today you graduated medical school. Diane said you didn't invite us, but I saw the invitation in the trash. I'm sitting in a hotel room 5 blocks from the ceremony, too much of a coward to simply show up. I want you to know how proud I am, how my heart swells knowing you've followed in my footsteps as a healer. I wonder if you're wearing the caduceus pin I gave you. I touched the pin on my lapel, the one I never took off, tears streaming down my face. Another entry, dated 2 years ago: Elena, I saw you today. You didn't see me. I was at Memorial for tests, and there you were at the nurse's station, white coat, stethoscope around your neck, looking so confident and capable. A doctor now, my daughter the doctor. I started to call out, but Diane pulled me toward the elevator. We'll be late, she said. The doors closed on your smile as you spoke with a patient. I've carried that smile with me all day. The entries continued, chronicling his growing awareness of Diane's manipulation, his declining health, his regrets. The final pages contained his plan, the revised will, the trust, the instructions for his flag, all designed to acknowledge me publicly and ensure I received what he wanted me to have. The last entry, dated just a week before his death, read simply: Elena, I hope someday you'll find this journal and know the truth. I never stopped loving you. You were always my greatest pride, my shining star. Forgive me for my weakness. All my love, always, Dad. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest as sobs racked my body. All the years of feeling abandoned, of wondering why he had chosen Diane and Marcus over me, it had all been built on lies. He had loved me all along, had tried in his way to reach out, had thought of me until the end. Morning found me exhausted but resolute. I packed the flag, the box with its precious contents, and checked out of the hotel. Before heading to the airport, I made one stop, at the offices of Dad's attorney, whose card had been included with the will. Martin Schaefer was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Dr. Martinez," he greeted me. "I've been expecting you. Please, sit down." "You knew my father well?" I asked as I took a seat across from his desk. "For over 30 years, he confirmed. "We served together before I left the military for law. Victor was one of the finest men I've ever known." He folded his hands on the desk. "I assume you've reviewed the documents?" I nodded. "I have questions. I expected you might. That's why I suggested you come here before returning home." For the next hour, he filled in the gaps the journal had left. How Dad had come to him 3 months before his death, determined to set things right. How they had worked together to create the trust, revise the will, file the instructions for the military funeral, all without Diane's knowledge. "He knew she would fight it," Schaefer explained. "That's why we ensured everything was legally bulletproof. The trust was established with his military pension and separate property assets that predated his marriage to Diane. She has no claim on any of it." "Did he know?" I asked quietly. "At the end, did he know what she'd done? Keeping me away from him?" Schaefer's expression softened. "Yes. A nurse showed him your letter, the one you gave to the orderly. It arrived the day before he died. He called me immediately, had me bring a notary to the hospital that night to finalize everything. His last act was ensuring you would know the truth." I wiped away tears. "Thank you for telling me this. There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a small box and slid it across to me. "He asked me to give you this personally. Said you'd understand its significance." Inside was a silver caduceus, the symbol of medicine, twin snakes wrapped around a winged staff. It was a perfect match to the pin I wore, but larger, heavier. Meant to be displayed rather than worn. Engraved on the back were the words, "From one healer to another, with pride and love, always." It was Dad's first medical insignia, received when he was commissioned as a doctor in the Army. He'd shown it to me once when I was a child, explaining its meaning, the responsibility it represented. To him, it had symbolized his life's purpose. "He wanted you to have it," Schaefer said softly. "To carry on the legacy." I closed my hand around the silver symbol, feeling its weight and meaning. "I will." As I prepared to leave, Schaefer handed me a final envelope. The keys to the cabin. It's fully stocked, maintained by a local caretaker. Victor went there whenever he could get away. Said it was the only place he could truly breathe. I thought of my cramped apartment near the hospital, the endless shifts. The exhaustion that had become my constant companion. "Thank you. For everything." He walked me to the door. "Your father was very proud of you, Dr. Martinez. Never doubt that." "I won't," I promised. "Not ever again." On the flight home, I held the journal in my lap, occasionally opening it to read random entries. Each page revealed another piece of the father I had thought lost to me, another moment when he had reached out across the gulf that separated us. By the time the plane landed, "We'll manage." I drove straight from the hospital to my apartment, packed a small bag, and set the GPS for the Blue Ridge Mountains. The drive took nearly 6 hours, the last 30 minutes on winding mountain roads that grew increasingly remote. When I finally turned onto the gravel drive marked by the coordinates in Schaefer's directions, the sun was setting behind the peaks. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines. It was modest but well-built, with a deep porch and large windows facing the valley below. As I stepped out of the car, the silence enveloped me, no traffic, no hospital announcements. No city noises, just the whisper of wind through the trees and distant birdsong. The key turned easily in the lock. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with military history, medical texts, and classic literature, Dad's favorites. A desk stood by the largest window, positioned to capture the view. On the mantel were photographs, me at various ages, from childhood through medical school graduation. A picture of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. Even a recent one of me in my white coat at the hospital, clearly taken from a distance without my knowledge. He had surrounded himself with images of the family he had lost, the daughter he couldn't reach. I moved through the space, touching things he had touched, sitting where he had sat, looking out at views he had contemplated. In this place, far from Diane's influence, he had kept me close. Here, I could feel his presence most strongly. That night, I built a fire using the stacked wood on the porch and settled into the worn leather chair that still held the impression of his form. With the flag draped over the chair's arm, the journal open in my lap, and the silver star and caduceus on the table beside me, I began to heal. In the days that followed, I explored the cabin and its surroundings. I hiked trails marked on maps he had annotated, discovered the fishing spot he had circled as perfect at sunset, sat on the boulder he had labeled best thinking spot. I read his books, noted his margin comments, slept in the bedroom that still held traces of his aftershave. And I read the journal cover to cover, absorbing every word, every regret, every expression of love. Through his written words, Dad and I had the conversations we'd been denied in life. I came to understand his struggles, his weaknesses, the manipulation that had separated us, and most importantly, the love that had never wavered despite it all. On my last night at the cabin, I sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. I wrapped myself in a blanket I'd found in his closet, soft from years of use. I forgive you, Dad, I whispered to the night. And I hope you forgive me too. For not fighting harder, for believing you'd forgotten me. The wind rustled through the trees, almost like a response. In that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, a sense of being exactly where I was meant to be, of carrying forward something precious and true. I returned to the hospital a different person than when I'd left. The weight of abandonment I'd carried for years had lifted, replaced by a bittersweet understanding of the truth. Dad had never stopped loving me. He had been proud of me. He had tried, in his way, to protect what we had. The knowledge transformed me, straightening my spine and lifting my chin as I walked through the hospital corridors. My colleague Samantha noticed the change immediately. "Something's different about you," she said, studying my face as we prepared for morning rounds. "You look lighter somehow." I smiled, fingering the caduceus pin on my lab coat. "I found something I thought I'd lost." She raised an eyebrow, waiting for elaboration, but some stories are too precious, too personal to share in the harsh fluorescent light of a hospital workroom. Instead, I picked up the first chart and began presenting the case. The rhythm of hospital life quickly reclaimed me, the long shifts, the adrenaline of emergency cases, the quiet satisfaction of helping people on their worst days. But now, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I had somewhere to retreat, if only in my mind, a cabin in the mountains, a leather chair by the fire, and the knowledge that I was carrying forward a legacy of healing and service. 2 weeks after my return, I was finishing paperwork when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with a DC area code. "Dr. Martinez speaking," I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued writing. "Elena? It's Marcus." My pen stilled. "Marcus. This is unexpected." "I know." His voice sounded strained, uncomfortable. "I got your number from Dad's attorney. I hope that's okay." I set down my pen, giving him my full attention. "What can I do for you?" He hesitated. "I've been going through Dad's study at the house. There are things here, medical books, journals, some of his military memorabilia, that I think he would want you to have." This was the last thing I'd expected. "Does Diane know you're calling me?" "No." The word came quickly, definitively. She's not handling things well. She's talking about contesting the will, saying Dad wasn't in his right mind when he made the changes." I closed my eyes, not surprised but still disappointed. "Mr. Schaefer warned me she might try." "It won't work," Marcus said. "I've seen the documentation. Dad knew exactly what he was doing." He paused. "That's part of why I'm calling. I found some letters in his desk, letters he wrote to you but never sent. And his journals from before he got sick. I've been reading them, trying to understand everything." My heart quickened. And I owe you an apology," he said, his voice dropping. "I believed what Mom told me, that you were too busy for Dad, that you didn't care enough to visit, that you were just waiting for your inheritance. I never questioned it. I should have." The admission hung between us, unexpected and raw. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it's the truth," he said simply. "And Dad's journals are full of how much he loved you, how proud he was of you, how he regretted the distance between you. He knew, at the end, what Mom had done. He tried to make it right." "With the flag," I said softly. "With the box." "Yes. And there's more. Things he couldn't include there." Another pause. "Would you meet with me?" "When I'm in town next week. There are things I think you should have, things I want to tell you in person." I considered refusing. What good would it do to reopen these wounds? But something in his voice, a sincerity, a regret that echoed my own, made me reconsider. "All right," I said finally. "Next week." We arranged to meet at a cafe near the hospital. As I hung up, I wondered what could possibly be left to say, what objects could matter now that Dad was gone. But something told me this meeting was important, not just for Marcus, but for me too. The cafe was busy when I arrived, the lunch rush in full swing. I spotted Marcus immediately, sitting at a corner table, a large cardboard box at his feet. He looked up as I approached, standing awkwardly to greet me. Elena. Thank you for coming. He gestured to the chair across from him. I ordered coffee. I remembered you take it black. It surprised me that he knew this small detail. We'd shared so few meals together over the years, always with tension simmering beneath the surface. How are things with Diane? I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. He grimaced. Not good. She's angry, at Dad, at the lawyers, at you. She's convinced herself that you manipulated him somehow during his illness. He shook his head. But I know that's not true. The journals make that clear. You mentioned letters, I said, steering away from the subject of Diane. Letters he wrote to me? Marcus nodded, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew an envelope, aged and slightly yellowed. This was the first one I found. It's dated shortly after you left for medical school. I took it with trembling fingers. My name was written on the front in Dad's distinctive handwriting. The letter inside was written on his personal stationery, 2 pages filled with his neat script. My dearest Elena, it began. Today I helped you move into your dormitory, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs and pretending not to notice the tears you were fighting back. My brave girl, always so determined to stand on her own. I want you to know how immensely proud I am, not just of your acceptance to medical school, but of the compassionate, resilient young woman you've become. The letter continued, full of love and pride and encouragement for the journey I was beginning. It was dated 2 weeks after I'd moved into my dorm. I remembered that day clearly. Dad had helped me move in, but Diane had been there too, rushing him, checking her watch, making comments about the excessive amount of books I'd brought. We'd barely had time for a proper goodbye before she'd hustled him away for some charity luncheon. I'd felt dismissed, an obligation to be discharged rather than a daughter to be cherished. But this letter told a different story. Dad had felt it too, the rushed goodbye, the things left unsaid. He'd gone home and poured his heart onto these pages. Why didn't he send it? I asked, looking up at Marcus. He shifted uncomfortably. From what I've pieced together from the journals, Mom intercepted his letters. He mentions giving one to her to mail, then later writing that you never responded. He looked down at his coffee. There are dozens of them, spanning years. All unsent. Dozens? I whispered. He nodded toward the box at his feet. These are yours. They always were. I stared at the box, trying to process what it contained, years of thoughts, love, connection that had been stolen from us. There's something else, Marcus said, his voice gentler now. Something Dad wrote specifically about me, about us. He pulled out another folded paper from his pocket. It's from his journal, dated about 5 years ago. I think you should read it. The entry was brief but powerful. Watched Elena and Marcus together at dinner tonight. The distance between them breaks my heart. 2 good people who might have been friends, even siblings in the true sense, if circumstances had been different. I see Diane subtly encouraging the divide, a comment here, an insinuation there. I should speak up, but the path of least resistance is so tempting after a long day. My silence makes me complicit. Someday, I hope they'll find their way to each other without the barriers Diane and I have allowed to stand between them. I looked up at Marcus, seeing him perhaps clearly for the first time. Not as Diane's son, not as the favored child, but as someone who had also been manipulated, also been used in a game he didn't fully understand. I didn't know, I said softly. Neither did I, he replied. Not until I read the journals. He hesitated. I've been thinking a lot about the person I want to be, the values I want to live by. Dad was a good man, honorable, compassionate, dedicated to service. I always admired that about him. But I've realized I was selective in which parts of his example I followed. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I don't want to be someone who looks the other way when something is wrong. I don't want to be complicit through silence. That's why I'm here, why I brought these things to you despite Mom's objections. It's what Dad would have wanted, and it's the right thing to do. I studied him, this stepbrother I'd never truly known. Thank you, I said finally. For the letters, for the truth. It means more than you know. We talked for another hour, sipping coffee that grew cold, beginning the slow work of dismantling years of misunderstanding. He told me about his own relationship with Dad, complicated in different ways than mine, fraught with expectations and comparisons to the father he barely remembered. I shared stories from my childhood, the years before he'd entered our lives, when Dad and I had been a team of 2 against the world. As we prepared to leave, Marcus helped me carry the box to my car. Before closing the trunk, he pulled out one more item, a framed photograph I hadn't noticed. This was on his bedside table, he said, handing it to me. Right until the end. It was a picture of Dad and me at my white coat ceremony, the day I officially began medical school. We stood side by side, both beaming with pride, his arm around my shoulders, my face turned slightly toward him with unabashed adoration. I remembered Diane taking the photo reluctantly, then rushing us to the reception because we were holding up the line. He looked at it every night, Marcus said quietly. I thought you should know that. Something broke and healed simultaneously within me at his words. The father I'd thought had forgotten me had kept me close every day, even when we were apart. He had loved me until the end. Thank you, I whispered, clutching the frame to my chest. Marcus nodded, then surprised me by offering a brief, awkward hug. Maybe we could talk again sometime, he said as he stepped back. Get to know each other properly, the way Dad would have wanted. I'd like that, I replied, finding that I truly meant it. That night, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by my father's letters. I read them in chronological order, watching his life, and mine, unfold through his eyes. He wrote about his pride in my accomplishments, his regret at our growing distance, his observations about my strength and compassion. Through every letter ran a current of unwavering love. Some made me laugh, his description of trying to assemble a bookshelf for his study and giving up after 3 hours of wrestling with Swedish instructions clearly written by sadists. Others brought tears, his reflection on seeing me exhausted during a holiday visit, noticing the dark circles under my eyes but being told by Diane not to coddle me. The most recent letter was dated just weeks before his death. The handwriting was shakier, the thoughts sometimes meandering, affected by medication and illness. But the love remained constant. My dearest Elena, he wrote. The doctors speak in hushed tones now, and I know what that means. Time is shorter than I'd hoped. There is so much I want to tell you, so many amends to make. I've instructed Reynolds about the flag ceremony, a public acknowledgement of what should never have been in question, that you are my daughter, my heir in all ways that matter, the bearer of my legacy of service and healing. The letter continued, explaining about the box, the cabin, the trust he'd established. These material things are poor substitutes for the years we've lost, he wrote. But they are what I can offer now, along with this truth: you have been loved, Elena. Completely and without reservation. Every day of your life. Remember that when I'm gone. I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing freely. The healing that had begun at Arlington, continued at the cabin, deepened now with each written word from beyond the grave. The past couldn't be changed, but my understanding of it, and the peace that understanding brought, was transforming my present and future. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the hospital with a new sense of purpose. Before rounds, I stopped at my locker and carefully pinned Dad's caduceus beside my own on my white coat. The two symbols of healing, one weathered by years of service, one still relatively new, gleamed side by side. Dr. Winters, the department chair, noticed it immediately during rounds. New pin, Dr. Martinez? He asked, peering at it through his reading glasses. My father's, I replied. He was an army doctor. Ah yes, Colonel Martinez, he nodded. Served with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan, if I recall correctly. He was something of a legend in military medicine. I stared at him in surprise. You knew of him? Indeed. We had some correspondence years ago about field trauma protocols. He studied my face. I didn't make the connection until now. You have his eyes, you know. And from what I've seen of your work, his dedication as well. A warmth spread through me at his words. Thank you, sir. That means a great deal. As we continued rounds, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his death, not as a ghost or supernatural force, but as a living legacy continued through my work, my choices, my commitment to healing. The caduceus on my coat was more than decoration, it was a tangible reminder of the values we shared, the path we both had chosen. In the weeks that followed, I divided my time between the hospital and the mountain cabin, gradually making it my own while preserving what had been his. I brought some of my books to intersperse with his on the shelves, added a comfortable reading chair opposite his by the fireplace, planted herbs in the small garden plot behind the cabin. The space became a sanctuary, a place to recharge when the demands of medicine threatened to deplete me. I hung the photograph Marcus had given me on the wall beside Dad's military portrait. The two images, the soldier in formal uniform and the proud father with his arm around his daughter, captured different facets of the same remarkable man. Marcus and I continued our cautious rapprochement, meeting occasionally for coffee or lunch when our schedules aligned. We were not instant siblings, not best friends, but we were finding our way toward something authentic, a relationship based on shared memories of Dad and growing mutual respect. Diane remained implacable in her anger. She pursued her challenge. To the will is threatened, but as Marcus had predicted, it went nowhere. The documentation was impeccable, Dad's mental competence well established by multiple witnesses. Eventually, her lawyer advised her to drop the case, which she did with bitter reluctance. I made no attempts to contact her, understanding that some bridges cannot be rebuilt. But I did send, through Marcus, a small box containing photographs of Dad that I thought she might want, casual snapshots from their years together, moments of happiness that deserved to be remembered despite everything that came after. 6 months after Dad's funeral, I received an unexpected call from Major Reynolds. "Dr. Martinez," he greeted me formally. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Major. What can I do for you?" "I'm calling with information I thought might interest you. The Army Medical Corps is establishing a new trauma training program, and they've decided to name it after your father, the Colonel Victor Martinez Center for Combat Medicine." My breath caught. That's wonderful. There will be a dedication ceremony next month at Walter Reed. As his next of kin, you'll be receiving an official invitation, but I wanted to give you advance notice. "Thank you," I managed, emotion tightening my throat. "I'll be there." "There's something else," Reynolds continued. "The program director asked if you might consider giving the keynote address at the dedication. Your father often spoke of your medical career, and they thought it would be fitting to have you speak about his legacy." The request overwhelmed me, to speak publicly about Dad, to articulate what he had meant as a doctor, a soldier, a father. But I knew immediately what my answer would be. "I would be honored," I said. In the weeks that followed, I worked on my speech during quiet evenings at the cabin, surrounded by Dad's books, his letters spread across the desk, his presence palpable in every corner. I wanted to capture not just his professional achievements, which were considerable, but the essence of the man, his integrity, his compassion, his dedication to service. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and bright. I stood at the podium, facing an audience of military personnel, medical professionals, and dignitaries. In the front row sat Major Reynolds and Captain Herrera, both in full dress uniform. Beside them, to my surprise, was Marcus. I touched the dual caduceus pins on my lapel for courage and began to speak. My father, Colonel Victor Martinez, understood that medicine is not merely a profession but a calling. That healing is not just a skill but an act of service. That courage is not the absence of fear but the determination to do what is right despite that fear. I spoke of his innovations in field trauma care that had saved countless lives, his mentorship of younger doctors, his unwavering ethical standards. I shared stories from his colleagues about his calm under fire, his insistence on treating enemy combatants with the same care as American soldiers, his ability to find humor in the darkest circumstances. But perhaps his greatest legacy, I continued, was his understanding that our greatest contributions often come not through grand gestures but through daily choices, the decision to show up, to do the difficult thing, to put service above self even when it costs us dearly. I looked out at the audience, my vision blurring slightly with unshed tears. My father taught me that healing is both a science and an art, that compassion is as vital as competence, that integrity cannot be compromised without diminishing ourselves. These values will be the foundation of the center that bears his name, continuing his work of saving lives and training the next generation of healers. As I concluded my remarks, the audience rose in applause. A general stepped forward to unveil the plaque bearing Dad's name and image that would hang at the entrance to the new center. As the covering fell away, revealing his familiar face cast in bronze, I felt a sense of completion, of rightness. This was how he should be remembered, as a healer, a teacher, a man of service. After the ceremony, as people mingled at the reception, an elderly man in a wheelchair approached me. He wore the uniform of a retired general, his chest heavy with decorations. "Dr. Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I served with your father in Desert Storm, long before you were born. He saved my leg after an IED explosion when every other doctor wanted to amputate." He patted his thigh with a gnarled hand. "Still got it, thanks to him. Not pretty, but it works." I smiled, shaking his hand. "Thank you for telling me. He talked about you all the time," the general continued. "Had your picture in his field kit. Used to say, my daughter's going to be a better doctor than I ever was." Looks like he was right. As the reception continued, more people approached with similar stories, lives saved, wisdom shared, kindness remembered. Each account added another brushstroke to the portrait of my father, making him more vivid, more complete in my understanding. Marcus found me as the event was winding down. "That was a beautiful speech," he said, handing me a glass of water. "Dad would have been proud." "Thank you for coming," I replied. "It means a lot." He nodded, glancing around at the dispersing crowd. "I've been thinking about what you said, about legacy being in daily choices. I'm making some changes in my life, trying to live more intentionally, more aligned with the values Dad embodied." He hesitated. I've applied to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders. Not as a doctor, obviously, but they need administrators too. The news surprised and touched me. That's wonderful, Marcus. Truly. It's a start, he said simply. As we walked together toward the exit, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. Dad was gone, but his legacy continued, in the center that would bear his name, in the lives he had touched, in the values he had instilled in both. His children, different as we were. The flag from his funeral now hung in a display case in my cabin, alongside his silver star and dog tags. The journals and letters occupied a special shelf in my bookcase. The photographs smiled down from walls and mantels. But his true legacy wasn't in these objects, precious as they were. It lived in the choices I made each day, in the work of my hands as I treated patients, in the compassion I strove to maintain even in the most challenging circumstances. Outside the medical center, the spring air was fresh with possibility. I looked up at the building that now bore Dad's name and whispered, "I'm carrying it forward, Dad. Your legacy, your love, your commitment to healing. I'm carrying it all forward." And somewhere, beyond the boundaries of this world, I felt certain he knew. 1 year after the dedication of the Colonel Victor Martinez Center for Combat Medicine, I stood in the emergency department of Metropolitan Hospital, gloved hands working methodically to suture a laceration on a young woman's forehead. The Friday night rush had brought the usual parade of injuries and illnesses: car accidents, alcohol poisoning, chest pains, and broken bones. I was halfway through my shift and already the mental tally of patients seen and treatments administered was starting to blur. "Almost done," I assured the woman, who had been remarkably stoic throughout the procedure. "The scar will be minimal, I promise." "Thank you, Dr. Martinez," she replied, her eyes studying my face. "You have very steady hands." I smiled behind my mask. My father used to say the same thing. He was a surgeon in the army. "Was he the one on your pin?" she asked, nodding toward the dual caduceus on my lab coat. "Yes," I said, placing the final stitch. "Colonel Victor Martinez. He taught me that healing isn't just about the physical repairs we make, it's about seeing the whole person in front of us." She nodded thoughtfully. "I can tell. Most doctors I've seen are so rushed they barely look at you. You're different." Her words stayed with me as I completed her discharge instructions, a reminder of why I had chosen this path, why I pushed through the exhaustion and heartbreak that sometimes accompanied emergency medicine. I was carrying forward not just Dad's name or his medical skills, but his approach to patients, seeing them as people first, cases second. After she left, I checked the board for my next patient. The digital display showed several waiting cases, color-coded by urgency. A new red entry caught my attention: trauma incoming, ETA 5 minutes. I moved quickly to the trauma bay, joining the team assembling to receive whatever emergency the ambulance was bringing. "What do we have?" I asked the charge nurse as I snapped on fresh gloves. "Multiple GSWs, military training accident," she replied, using the shorthand for gunshot wounds. "2 incoming, first is critical. Second ambulance 3 minutes behind." My heart rate picked up as it always did before a major trauma. No matter how many I handled, that surge of adrenaline remained, the body's way of sharpening focus, heightening awareness. I could almost hear Dad's voice from years ago: "Use it, don't fight it. Let it make you better, not sloppy." The doors burst open as paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, one of them straddling the patient performing CPR. I caught glimpses of a young man in camouflage fatigues, blood-soaked gauze covering what appeared to be chest and abdominal wounds. 24-year-old male, 2 gunshot wounds to the right chest, 1 to the upper abdomen, the paramedic reported rapidly. BP 80/40ths and falling, lost pulse 2 minutes ago, currently in PEA. 2 large-bore IVs running wide open, for units ONEG hung in the field. We transferred him to the trauma table, continuing CPR as we cut away clothing and connected monitors. I took the lead position at the head of the bed, calling out orders as my hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pupils, assessing airway, directing the placement of a chest tube to relieve pressure from what was clearly a hemothorax. "Type and cross for 6 more units," I directed. "Get ultrasound in here now. I want to see what's happening in that abdomen." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of focused intensity: the rapid assessment, the discovery of massive internal bleeding, the decision to perform an emergency thoracotomy when his heart stopped again. My hands moved inside his chest cavity, locating and clamping the torn vessels, my mind calm despite the critical situation. When we finally stabilized him enough for transfer to the operating room, I stepped back, peeling off my bloody gloves and gown. The surgical team was already waiting to take him upstairs for definitive repair of his injuries. His chances were still guarded, but he was alive, something that hadn't been certain when he'd arrived. As I updated the chart, Dr. Winters appeared beside me. "Impressive work in there, Martinez," he said, his usual gruff manner softened slightly. "That cross-clamp technique, I haven't seen many people pull that off successfully outside of a proper or field medicine adaptation," I replied. "My father taught me. He used it in Afghanistan when conventional approaches weren't working." Winters nodded appreciatively. "Well, it saved that young soldier's life today. Your father would be proud." Before I could respond, the second ambulance arrived. This patient was less critical, a sergeant who had been standing nearby when the training accident occurred. He had a single gunshot wound to the thigh that had missed major vessels but caused significant muscle damage. As I examined him, I noticed the name on his uniform, Reynolds. "Any relation to Major James Reynolds?" I asked as I cleaned the wound. The sergeant looked surprised. "He's my uncle. You know him?" I smiled. "He was a friend of my father's. Colonel Martinez. They served together." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're Elena. The doctor. Uncle. Jim mentioned you. Said your dad saved his life in Fallujah." He shook his head in amazement. "Small world." "Very small," I agreed, feeling that familiar warmth that came whenever I encountered these connections to Dad's life. "How is Johnson?" the sergeant asked anxiously. "The private who came in first." "He's just a kid, first training exercise." "He's in surgery now," I said honestly. "His injuries are severe, but we got him stabilized. The surgical team is excellent." Reynolds nodded, his face solemn. He froze when the exercise started going wrong. I tried to push him clear. His voice trailed off, the guilt evident in his expression. "You did everything you could," I assured him, recognizing the burden of responsibility he carried. Another echo of conversations I'd had with Dad about the weight of command, the impossible choices faced in moments of crisis. Later that night, after my shift ended, I sat in the hospital chapel. I wasn't particularly religious, but I found the quiet space conducive to reflection after difficult cases. The young soldier, Private Johnson, had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. His next 24 hours would be crucial. I closed my eyes, feeling the fatigue of the long shift settling into my bones. Yet beneath the exhaustion was a deep satisfaction, the knowledge that I had done good work today, had made a difference in at least one life hanging in the balance. My phone vibrated with an incoming text. It was from Marcus. "Just heard about the training accident. Reynolds said you were the attending physician. Said you worked a miracle. Dad would be so proud." The message brought tears to my eyes. The connections continued to surprise me, how Dad's world and mine intersected in unexpected ways, how the legacy of his work rippled outward, touching lives I encountered years after his death. I typed back a simple response, "Just doing what we were trained to do. How are your DWB preparations going?" Marcus had completed his application to Doctors Without Borders and been accepted for an administrative position with their program in Sudan. He was leaving in 2 weeks, a major life change inspired, at least in part, by our conversations about Dad's commitment to service. My phone buzzed again, terrified and excited. Wish Dad could see this. He'd probably say I finally found a worthwhile use for my business degree. I smiled, imagining Dad's reaction. He had always been somewhat dismissive of Marcus's corporate career path, not understanding the appeal of boardrooms and profit margins compared to the direct impact of medicine or military service. This shift toward humanitarian work would have pleased him immensely. He'd be proud, I texted back. Really proud. When I finally left the hospital, the night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I drove home on autopilot, my mind still partially in the trauma bay with Private Johnson, running through the case, considering what we'd done right and what might have been improved. My apartment felt empty after the intensity of the ED. Kicked off my shoes and made tea, then carried it to the small balcony that had been my primary criteria when choosing this place. The view wasn't spectacular, just the city skyline in the distance, lights twinkling against the night sky, but it offered air and space and perspective when the walls felt too close. Leaning against the railing, I thought about the day's events, about connections and continuity, about the invisible threads that linked past to present. Dad had treated Major Reynolds in Fallujah, now I had treated his nephew in an American emergency room. Dad had struggled to connect with Marcus. Now Marcus was embracing values Dad had tried to instill. Dad had taught me medical techniques that today had saved a young soldier's life. These continuities brought comfort, a sense that nothing truly ended but rather transformed, evolved, found new expressions. Even grief, that most difficult of emotions, had transformed over time, from the sharp, jagged pain of early loss to something more nuanced, a bittersweet awareness that integrated both absence and ongoing presence. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. The hospital number appeared on the screen. Dr. Martinez, I answered. It's Nguyen from the ICU, came the reply. Your trauma patient, Private Johnson? He's asking for you. He's awake and his vitals are stabilizing. Thought you'd want to know. Relief washed through me. That's excellent news. Please tell him I'll see him during rounds tomorrow. Will do. Good call on that thoracotomy. Made all the difference. After hanging up, I remained on the balcony, watching the stars. Life and death, loss and connection, endings and beginnings, the eternal cycles of existence that we navigate as best we can. Dad had understood this, had found meaning in the service of something larger than himself. In following his path, I was discovering the same truth. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the mountains. The cabin had become my weekend sanctuary, a place to recover and recharge between the demands of hospital shifts. As I navigated the winding roads, I thought about my plans for the day, checking the garden I'd expanded last month, finishing the book I'd started last weekend, perhaps hiking to the ridge Dad had marked as having the best views. The cabin came into view as I rounded the final curve, solid, welcoming, bathed in morning sunlight. I'd made some changes over the past year, a fresh coat of paint, new curtains, the hammock strung between two pines, but had preserved its essential character, the features Dad had loved. As I unlocked the door, my phone rang again. An unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Dr. Martinez speaking, I answered, setting my bag on the kitchen counter. Dr. Elena Martinez, a formal male voice asked. This is Colonel Richard Blackburn from the Army Medical Corps. Yes, Colonel. What can I do for you? I moved to the window, looking out at the mountains as I spoke. I'm calling about the Martinez Fellowship in Combat Medicine. We've reviewed your application and would like to offer you the position. My breath caught. The fellowship was a 6-month program I'd applied for at the Martinez Center, teaching combat medicine techniques to military doctors preparing for deployment while continuing my own research and trauma care. It was competitive, prestigious, and deeply meaningful given its connection to Dad. Thank you, Colonel. I'm honored, I managed to reply, my free hand gripping the windowsill for support. Your credentials are impeccable, and your recent work with traumatic thoracic injuries was particularly impressive, he continued. Plus, I have to say there's a certain poetry in having Colonel Martinez's daughter leading the first cohort of fellows at the center bearing his name. When would you need me to start? I asked, mind already racing with logistics. The program begins in September, so approximately 3 months from now. We'll send formal paperwork shortly, but I wanted to give you the news personally. After thanking him again and ending the call, I sank into Dad's leather chair, still Dad's chair in my mind despite the year that had passed. The fellowship was an unexpected opportunity, a chance to expand my skills while honoring his legacy in the most direct way possible. The timing felt significant, coming exactly 1 year after the center's dedication. I moved to the bookshelf, where I kept Dad's journals, running my fingers along their worn spines. I'd read them all multiple times, finding new insights with each reading. Today, I pulled out the earliest one, from his first deployment as a young Army doctor. Opening to a random page, I read, treated 3 soldiers today after an IED strike. The worst had extensive shrapnel injuries to his abdomen and chest. Conventional approach wasn't an option with our limited equipment. Had to improvise, adapt techniques I'd only read about. He survived. In that moment, I understood why I became a doctor, not just to heal, but to find solutions when the textbook answers aren't enough. To stand between death and those in my care and say, not today. The parallels to my experience with Private Johnson the previous day were striking. Without consciously realizing it, I had followed in Dad's footsteps, not just in career choice, but in the specific moment of innovation under pressure, the refusal to accept defeat when a life hung in the balance. The realization brought both tears and laughter, the complex emotion of recognizing how deeply his influence ran in my life, how his legacy lived on through my hands and mind and heart. I had spent so many years feeling disconnected from him, and now, a year after his death, I had never felt more connected. I spent the day in peaceful solitude, gardening in the morning, hiking in the afternoon, preparing a simple dinner as the sun began to set. As twilight deepened into night, I built a fire in the stone fireplace and settled into my reading chair, opposite Dad's. The arrangement had become a symbol to me, 2 distinct individuals sharing a common space, a common purpose, a common legacy. My phone chimed with an email notification. Opening it, I found the formal offer letter from the Martinez Center, along with additional information about the fellowship program. Attached was a photograph of the center's entrance, the bronze plaque bearing Dad's image, and below it, a new addition, a framed photo of me giving the keynote address at the dedication ceremony. The caption read, "The legacy continues, Dr. Elena Martinez follows in her father's footsteps, bringing combat medicine innovations to a new generation. Seeing the two images, Dad's distinguished face in bronze and my own more youthful features below, crystallized something I had been feeling increasingly over the past year. Legacy isn't something static, preserved in plaques and memorabilia. It's dynamic, evolving, finding new expression through those who carry it forward. Dad's legacy wasn't just about remembering him. It was about continuing what he had begun, adapting it to new circumstances, extending its reach beyond what he could have accomplished alone. The next morning, I called the hospital to adjust my schedule for the coming months. Dr. Winters was surprisingly supportive. The Martinez Fellowship? That's prestigious, he acknowledged. We'll hate to lose you for 6 months, but the skills you'll bring back will be invaluable. And it's fitting, your father's daughter teaching at your father's center. Thank you for understanding, I said, relieved at his positive reaction. Martinez, he said, his voice softening slightly, I've watched you this past year. Seen how you've grown not just as a physician but as a person. Your father's death could have broken you. Instead, you've used it to build something stronger. His observation stayed with me as I prepared to return to the city. Had I grown stronger? It wasn't how I would have described my journey, but looking back, I could see the truth in his words. The pain of loss, the revelations about Dad and Diane, the reconnection with Marcus, all of it had reshaped me, not into someone new, but into a more complete version of who I had always been. The following week brought another unexpected development. I was reviewing charts at the nurses' station when the department secretary approached. Dr. Martinez, there's someone here asking for you. Says it's important. I looked up, expecting a patient's family member or perhaps a pharmaceutical rep. Instead, I saw an elderly woman standing uncertainly in the waiting area, her silver hair neatly styled, her posture military straight despite her evident age. I approached, offering my hand. I'm Dr. Martinez. Can I help you? She studied my face intently before speaking. Elena. You look so much like him. Something in her voice triggered recognition. You knew my father? She nodded. Very well. I'm Margaret Lawson. I was the head nurse at the field hospital in Kandahar during your father's second deployment. The name clicked into place. Maggie. He mentioned you in his journals. A smile transformed her face. He called me Maggie. Not many did. She glanced around the busy emergency department. Is there somewhere we could talk? I've been meaning to find you since I heard about Victor's passing, but it took me some time to work up the courage. We found a quiet corner in the hospital cafeteria. Margaret, Maggie, had brought a small photo album, which she opened carefully on the table between us. Victor and I served together for 18 months, she explained, turning pages filled with faded photographs of desert landscapes, medical tents, and groups of uniformed personnel. The worst of the fighting. The hardest cases. She pointed to a picture of Dad in surgical scrubs, looking impossibly young, standing beside a petite blonde woman in a nurse's uniform. That's me, 1991. I studied the image, seeing both the father I remembered and a stranger, the young doctor before life's complications, before Diane, before the distance that grew between us. He looked tired but fulfilled, his arm casually draped around Maggie's shoulders in the easy camaraderie of colleagues who had faced crisis together. We were a good team, Maggie continued, her voice warm with memory. He was brilliant, could improvise solutions no one else would think of. But what made him special was how he treated everyone, patients, staff, even enemy combatants, with the same basic human dignity. She turned more pages, sharing stories with each photograph, the time Dad had performed surgery by flashlight. When generators failed, the Christmas they'd tried to create a festive atmosphere in the medical tent with supplies from care packages, the day they'd saved 6 soldiers from a helicopter crash against all odds. Why did you want to find me? I asked finally, as she closed the album. Maggie's eyes, still sharp despite her years, held mine steadily. Because Victor was the finest man I ever knew, and I wanted his daughter to hear that from someone who knew him at his best. And because I made him a promise, long ago, that if anything ever happened to him, I would check on you. Make sure you were all right. When did you make this promise? I asked, puzzled. After your mother died, she said gently. Victor was devastated. Worried sick about raising you alone. We stayed in touch over the years, Christmas cards, occasional calls. He was so proud when you decided to become a doctor. Her expression clouded. The calls became less frequent after he married Diane. Then they stopped altogether. I nodded, understanding. She controlled his communications. Intercepted letters, messages. I suspected as much, Maggie sighed. The Victor the first knew would never have lost touch willingly, especially with you. She reached across the table, covering my hand with her weathered one. When I read his obituary last year, I felt I'd failed him by not checking sooner. But here you are, a doctor, just like he wanted. He would be so proud. Thank you, I said, emotion making my voice rough. For coming. For the stories. For keeping your promise, even if it's late. She smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Victor always said timing was everything in medicine. Perhaps this is exactly when you needed to hear these things. We talked for another hour, Maggie sharing more memories, filling in gaps in my understanding of Dad's early career. When we finally parted, she pressed the photo album into my hands. I want you to have this, she insisted. These memories belong with you now. I protested, but she was adamant. I'm 82, dear. I've had these images in my heart for decades. They'll stay with me. But you're still building your understanding of him. These might help. That night, I sat in my apartment poring over the album, discovering a side of Dad I had never known, the young, idealistic doctor serving in harsh conditions, saving lives with limited resources, forming bonds that transcended the chaos of war. In Maggie's photographs and stories, I found new dimensions to the man I thought I had known completely. The final page held a surprise, a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to me in Dad's handwriting. The date showed it had been written shortly after Mom's death, when I was just 8 years old. My dearest Elena, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and Maggie has kept her promise to look after you. I write this in a desert tent, thousands of miles from you, my heart aching with the separation. Your mother's death has shown me how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. I want you to know, no matter what happens, that you are the light of my life, the purpose that drives me forward each day. The letter continued, full of love and hopes for my future, advice for life's challenges, and his vision of the woman I might become. It was a message from the past, from the father who had loved me unconditionally before complications and interference had created distance between us. Whatever path you choose, the letter concluded, know that I am proud of you. If I am no longer there to tell you this in person, hear it in your heart. You are loved. You are capable. You are enough, exactly as you are. All my love, always, Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely. It was as if Dad had reached across time and beyond death to offer the reassurance I had sought for so long. In this letter, written 25 years ago, I found confirmation of what I had come to believe over the past year, that his love had never wavered, even when circumstances had made it difficult to express. The next day, I called Marcus to tell him about Maggie's visit and the album. There's so much about Dad I never knew, I said. So many sides to him beyond what we saw at home. I'd like to see it sometime, he replied. Before I leave for Sudan. Add some pieces to my own understanding. We arranged to meet at the cabin that weekend, his first visit to Dad's sanctuary. As I hung up, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The broken family from the funeral had transformed, not healed completely, not restored to some idealized wholeness, but evolving into something new and authentic. Diane remained distant, but Marcus and I had found a connection based on mutual respect and shared memories. More importantly, I had reclaimed my relationship with Dad, understanding it in all its complexity rather than through the distorted lens Diane had created. The week passed in a blur of preparations, completing paperwork for the fellowship, arranging coverage for my hospital shifts, updating research projects that would need to be handed off to colleagues. Through it all ran a current of anticipation. A sense of stepping into a new chapter that honored the past while creating something unique. Friday evening found me at the cabin, preparing for Marcus's visit. I'd stocked the refrigerator, aired out the guest room, and built a fire against the mountain chill. As I arranged Dad's photo album on the coffee table, I realized I was nervous, not just about hosting Marcus. The sound of tires on gravel announced his arrival. I stepped onto the porch as his car pulled up, watching him emerge and look around with appreciative eyes. This is beautiful, he said, taking in the pine trees, the mountain view, the simple cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. No wonder Dad loved it here. Welcome, I said, feeling the rightness of his presence in this place that had meant so much to our father. Come in. There's so much to show you. As he followed me inside, I felt the circle beginning to close, not an ending, but a completion of sorts. The journey that had begun at Arlington National Cemetery, with the honor guard folding the flag for Colonel Martinez, had led through pain and revelation to this moment of sharing, of connection, of legacy continued. The flag itself now hung in a display case on the cabin wall, a reminder not just of loss but of recognition, of being seen and acknowledged. Beside it hung the bronze star Dad had earned in Afghanistan, and below that, the dual caduceus pins. His and mine, mounted together on blue velvet. Is that Dad's journal? Marcus asked, noticing the leather-bound book on the side table. One of them, I replied. I was just reading his entry from the day he bought this place. Want to hear it? As Marcus settled into the chair opposite Dad's, my chair now, I opened the journal to the marked page and began to read. Found a piece of heaven today, a cabin in the mountains where the air clears the mind and the silence speaks to the soul. This will be my sanctuary, my place of healing when the world demands too much. Someday, I hope to share it with Elena, to show her the sunset from the ridge, to sit by the fire and talk of things that matter. Legacy isn't in objects or accolades, it's in connections, in values passed forward, in love that transcends time. Today, I've secured a small piece of that legacy, not just for myself, but for those who will come after. Marcus listened intently, his eyes moving around the cabin as if seeing it through Dad's words, understanding its significance beyond the physical structure. When I finished reading, he was quiet for a long moment. He found it, he said finally. What he was looking for. A place to belong fully, to be entirely himself. He looked at me with new understanding. And now you have too. I nodded, feeling the truth of his observation. We both have, in our way. Different paths, same destination. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Dad's favorite time of day at the cabin. Together, Marcus and I moved to the porch to watch the spectacle, standing side by side in companionable silence. Legacy, I thought, watching the light transform the landscape. Not what's left behind, but what continues forward. Not an ending, but an eternal beginning. The Martinez Fellowship exceeded every expectation I had formed. Walking through the doors of the center bearing Dad's name that first morning felt like crossing a threshold between worlds, the past and present converging in a single step. The bronze plaque of Dad's face seemed to watch with approval as I made my way to the orientation room where 12 military doctors awaited their instructor. Welcome to the inaugural class of the Martinez Fellowship, I began, looking at the eager faces before me. I'm Dr. Elena Martinez, and yes, Colonel Martinez was my father. But I'm not standing before you because of my name. I'm here because of what I can teach you about saving lives in the most challenging conditions imaginable. For the next 6 months, I divided my time between teaching combat medicine techniques and conducting research on thoracic trauma interventions. The military doctors, all accomplished physicians in their own right, brought a dedication and focus that pushed me to continually refine my methods. We worked in simulated field conditions, practiced procedures with minimal equipment, and developed innovations that could be implemented in combat zones. The difference between a good combat physician and an exceptional one, I told them during one particularly grueling simulation, isn't just technical skill. It's the ability to stay calm in chaos, to improvise when standard procedures fail, and to see possibilities where others see only limitations. As I spoke, I realized I was channeling Dad, not just his words from journals and letters, but his essential philosophy of medicine. The recognition brought a smile to my face mid-lecture. Something amusing, Dr. Martinez? Asked Captain Rivera, one of the more astute fellows. Just recognizing how much we absorb from our mentors without realizing it, I replied. Sometimes. I hear my father's voice in my own teaching. That's how legacy works, Rivera nodded. My grandmother was a nurse in Vietnam. I catch myself using her phrases with patients all the time. The exchange sparked a deeper discussion about medical lineage, about how knowledge and wisdom pass from generation to generation, evolving with each transmission. It was one of many unexpected moments of connection that characterized the fellowship. Occasions when teaching transcended mere information transfer to become something more profound. 3 months into the program, I received an email that changed everything. The subject line read simply, Invitation, International Conference on Combat Trauma Care. The body of the message was equally direct. Dr. Martinez, based on your groundbreaking work with thoracic interventions in limited resource settings, we invite you to deliver the keynote address at the upcoming International Conference on Combat Trauma Care in Geneva this April. As the inaugural Martinez Fellow and daughter of the pioneering Colonel Victor Martinez, your unique perspective bridges generations of combat medicine innovation. Please confirm your availability at your earliest convenience. Regards, General William Hayes, Conference Chair. I stared at the screen, momentarily stunned. The conference was the premier gathering of military medical professionals worldwide. To be invited as keynote speaker was an extraordinary honor, especially for someone my age. When I shared the news with Dr. Blackburn, the program director, he was unsurprised. Your research on modified thoracotomy techniques has been causing quite a stir in military medical circles, he said. And your results with Private Johnson's case study were particularly compelling. The timing couldn't be better. You'll have completed the fellowship just before the conference. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say yes, he replied simply. Your father addressed this same conference 15 years ago. It seems fitting for you to follow in his footsteps. That evening, I called Marcus from my temporary apartment in Washington. He had been in Sudan for nearly 5 months, his voice now perpetually tired but animated with purpose when we spoke. A keynote address? Elena, that's incredible. He exclaimed when I told him. Will you accept? I think so, I said. It's intimidating, but also feels right somehow. Like coming full circle. Dad would be over the moon, Marcus said, his voice softening. Remember how he used to practice his lectures pacing around the living room? Mom would get so annoyed with his muttering. The shared memory made me laugh. I'd forgotten that. He'd walk in circles, gesturing with his coffee mug, completely oblivious to everything around him. Until he spilled coffee on her white carpet, Marcus added. That did not go over well. These moments of reminiscence had become more frequent. Between us, remembering Dad without the filter of Diane's manipulations, finding humor and warmth in shared experiences that had once seemed separate due to the divisions in our family. How are things there? I asked, changing the subject. The connection crackled slightly, the satellite phone less than reliable. Challenging. Rewarding. Heartbreaking. Sometimes all in the same hour, he replied. The medical team performed 3 cleft palate repairs yesterday on children who would never have had access to the surgery otherwise. I helped coordinate the logistics, arranged transport for the families. Seeing those kids afterward. His voice trailed off. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.